So, I'm going to be talking about Agile project management with Lean and Kanban. It's an introductory session. So it does not require any pre-knowledge of either Agile, Lean, or anything Kanban. On the other hand, it also means that there's only a certain level of depth that I can go into. Okay, so who here is new to Agile? Raise your hand. Quite a few. Who here has done some Lean stuff, with or without Agile? Six Sigma? Not sure I count that as Lean. But good, better than waterfall. Okay, sounds like, or looks like we have the right audience. Brilliant. Okay, who here is a project manager? Wait. 4 people? Okay, 5 people? 6? Seriously? Only that few? Okay. This is a talk that is slightly tailored towards project managers, like these people who are very heavily involved in project overhead, I would call that. It's supposed to be a gentle introduction into becoming more agile and moving away from waterfall. Okay, today I'm going to be talking about a couple of things. As I said, it's originally tailored towards project managers. As a project manager, when you move into Agile, oftentimes the first thing you hear is, in Agile we don't have project managers, which is not actually true. It's only that you don't have project managers in Scrum. Most other Agile methodologies, actually, you can have Agile project managers. So, as a project manager, how do I add value when I'm moving towards a more Agile framework? Understand what a Kanban system is, understand what a pull system is, if you've heard that term before. I'll talk a tiny little bit about metrics, because that's usually quite important for most companies that use Scrum waterfall and then switch to Agile. Oftentimes important for Agile companies as well. I'll talk about something called theory of constraints a little bit, and how to manage risks. Again, something that traditionally PMs do a lot, or at least they think they do a lot of that. A little bit about how you do estimates. So, does anybody know about planning poker? I'm not going to be talking about planning poker at all, because in Lean and in Kanban, we do it in a very, very different way. Agile estimation. So even if you know something about Agile, maybe that is new to you. And I think I have one slide where I talk for 1 minute about how to scale it up. Okay, very quickly about me. My name is Michael. I'm one of the organizers of Agile Hong Kong. I help organize a lot of meetup groups. We have a monthly meetup for Agile Hong Kong, just in case you're interested. If you want to join, just go to meetup.com and search for Agile Hong Kong. On top of that, I also run a meetup group called Lean Kanban Hong Kong, which is a little bit more tailored towards Kanban and Lean. On the Agile Hong Kong group, which is still awesome, it tends to be a little bit more talk about Scrum. That's the only difference. I've been doing Agile for about 16 years. Some companies I work for, large companies, small companies, startups. I prefer working for smaller companies because then you can actually feel the impact that you're having. I already asked the question, who here is a project manager? So for this slide, probably not that many people will raise their hands. I'm assuming there's 5 or 6 project managers in this room are going to raise their hands. Yeah, so I'm not going to ask the question. Usually, this is the stuff that project managers do. Do you know a project manager? Is that what you think they are doing most of the time? If yes, raise your hand. I'm kind of expecting most hands up.
This can apply to other jobs as well.
Yes. It does apply to other jobs as well. Why? Because it's a more secretarial job. It's when you do coordination. Most project managers never manage a project. They at best do some kind of coordination. So it's not just an agile problem, also it's a waterfall problem. As a project manager, how do I add value? When you come from a waterfall organization, one of the things people bitch about a lot is, my PM is useless, they don't do anything. The only thing that they do is put me in touch with someone else that I can contact myself. Because nowadays we have a system called email, where I can just send people an email directly without having to go through someone else. That's what most PMs do, unfortunately. That doesn't add much value. So in Agile, when it comes to adding value as a PM, the discussion shifts more towards how can we become leaders? How can we add value? How can we manage risks, especially if you come from a lean point of view? It's more about risk management. Actually, if you come from a lean point of view or lean Kanban point of view, everything, the whole Agile thing is about risk management. What's the biggest risk to any project? Once you finish, no one is ever going to use it. And that's exactly what Agile is trying to prevent. The way we look at everything that happens inside companies is from a service delivery point of view. Everything that you do, everything that your team does, it's delivering a service. It might be that your customers are internal, which is okay, but you're still delivering a service. The whole company as a whole, again, is delivering a service. That's the lens through which we look at stuff when it comes to leading Kanban. The goal that we have is to give people reliable and predictable services or data. Do you want to take a picture?
That's okay.
The slides will be made available as well. The slides will be made available for all the conference talks. So in short, I would say we are helping Agile project managers to become leaders. But not just Agile project managers, actually we're helping everyone, even everyone in the team. We encourage leadership on all levels. Okay. Anyone here been to Japan? Anyone been to Japan during the cherry blossom season? It's awesome. Well, it looks really, really beautiful. That's exactly what you see on the picture. As far as I know, there used to be a lot of parks in Japan that used Kanban systems. As far as I know, there's only one left for now. When you go into the park, you get a physical ticket. It's free. You don't have to pay. If you go in there with your wife, girlfriend, husband, boyfriend, child, baby, they give you 2 tickets or 3 tickets, 1 per person. They only have a limited number of tickets, and when they run out, they don't let anyone in anymore. When you leave the park, you have to hand back the ticket. Why would they do that? Experience management? What does that mean? Sorry? Everyone has their own amount of space. It's not too busy.
They're meeting the objective of basically saying, we want people to see the cherry blossoms, but we want people to enjoy themselves. So they're the frontier.
Has anyone here been to Disneyland in Shanghai? No? Has anyone seen pictures of Disneyland in Shanghai?
It's Disneyland everywhere.
Yeah.
It's way more people than Hong Kong, which I think is already overcrowded. They let anyone in who's willing to pay. Everyone has fun.
That's corporation.
Right?
That's the actual difference.
I would say that's the difference. They just put an emphasis on something else. Here, if you look at this picture, in Shanghai or Disneyland Shanghai, you would never be able to snap such a picture without other people in the picture. Complete strangers. Ever. Here, you can enjoy a picnic underneath a tree. It's nice. Comfy. You see there's grass. It's not trampled to death. There are other considerations as well, like toilets. How do you maintain them? It's free entry for the park. So the government or someone still pays to maintain the park. You could say it's for your experience. This is actually a Kanban system. It's a pull system. When capacity is full, you don't let more people in. And Kanban applies the same principle. Some of you, has anyone here ever used a Kanban board? A lot of people running Scrum actually use Kanban boards. So in some Kanban boards, you limit the number of work that can go into a specific column. That is your capacity, or the number signifies your capacity. When it's full, you don't let more work in. This is designed to relieve you from what we call the waste of overburdening. If you can check it out with yourself. If you've ever been really, really busy with many different things, you realize that your productivity will go down because you do a lot of task switching. Many other reasons as well. And this is exactly the kind of waste that Kanban will help you to prevent. Starbucks, funny enough, is using a Kanban system as well. You have a limited capacity to make coffee. Oh, but technically the coffee machine over there is using a Kanban system. When there's demand and capacity, you can make a coffee. You cannot go over capacity. So in reality, the kind of work that we do, knowledge work, work that mostly happens within our minds, our heads, we often use virtual Kanban boards, something like this, to visualize our workflow. Scrum boards, which only has 3 columns, to do, doing, done, is probably a very, very simplistic form of a Kanban board. I think technically it's not really a Kanban board because it does not show you your workflow. It's more a task board. But it's a visualization. So here, work flows. We use the word flow. Work goes from the left of the board to the right. In every column, you will see a number at the top. 5 means you cannot have more than 5 tickets in there. 3 means you cannot have 3 tickets in there over both columns. The in progress column, ongoing, or down. So we can see, oh, there's capacity over there in the test ready column. It has a number 5. Currently, there's only 1 ticket in there. So you pull the ticket over. This is one of the reasons why we call it pull system. You pull it over. Oh, now there's capacity there. We have free capacity for 1 more ticket. We pull it over. And there's capacity there, so we pull more tickets over. This is roughly how the dynamics of Kanban work. Any questions so far? If you have questions, just...
About the base design on the UAT is ready.
Yes.
There's no capacity.
It means there is no limit. Some companies you can have a limit. In a lot of companies, especially when you hand it over to a completely different department, you cannot control the limit yourself. Instead of UAT, it could be waiting for deployment. For most companies, you don't put a limit of stuff that you can deploy. And yeah, if you, for example, if you deploy once a year, everything that's ready that kind of goes in there. If you deploy once every 2 weeks, it's the same thing. You have a different number of tickets that can be deployed. Yes?
So what about the size or the effort in each ticket? Do they have to be like there's a restriction? Can I have a really big ticket?
It helps if they're similarly sized, but they don't have to be. It helps. There is no rule that says they have to be the same size. Okay, any more questions before we move on? Traditionally, as a PM, or coming from a waterfall organization, there are a lot of things that we put emphasis on. Processes and tools, we all know about that. Resource efficiency. What does that mean? Everyone needs to be 100% utilized. That's quite common. Actually, in a lot of agile organizations, we still put an emphasis on that. A lot of companies running Scrum, we make sure that every developer is assigned to a team and has stuff to do. And in Scrum, one of the things that we have is, we call it punctual improvements. What is a punctual improvement? Improvement All the stuff that you guys do when you do a retrospective at the end of a sprint. You do retrospectives every 2 weeks. And for most Scrum teams, that is when they do improvements, or when they decide what improvements they do. Scrum doesn't prevent you from doing improvements outside of that, but it just tends to be the bucket where all the improvement happens. In Kanban, we move away from processes and tools. Still important, it's like they say in the Agile Manifesto, processes and tools are important. But what's way more important, way more, is the mindset. We try not to talk about resource efficiency at all. Instead, what we talk about is flow efficiency. We don't look at people in Kanban if we can avoid it, at least not when it comes to resource efficiency. We look at the work. As long as the work gets done well, to high quality and fast, it's good. If we can get more work done by actually having an 80% resource utilization, or maybe even, God forbid, 40%, then yeah, let's go to 40%. And out of punctual improvements, we move to continuous improvement. I know in Agile, everyone says they're doing continuous improvement, but I can show you some tools or some techniques that actually allow you to do continuous improvements. This is a simplification of the Kanban principles. There are more, but I think they're probably the most important ones. So, the first principle, which most Agilists or people who are doing Agile don't really understand, even though it's super simple. Start where you are. What does that mean? It means make no changes. I'm an Agile coach. As an Agile coach, it's actually really hard for me to go into another company and not do anything. If you're a senior manager and you want to start using Kanban, it's really hard to actually not do anything. Because there seems to be a contradiction between not doing anything and starting something. But that's our first principle. Does anyone have any idea why we would say, don't do anything? Start with where you are now. Any guesses? Study the situation.
Where you are.
Yes, one of the reasons, but why would you need more context? Because if you're doing Scrum, you don't need context. You just come in, you implement Scrum, Scrum Master, Product Owner.
You still need it.
You end up with Scrum in the end.
Everywhere you need it.
I'm not saying you don't need it, but most people, when they do Scrum, when you start Scrum, you just grab your existing organizational chart and you implement a Scrum chart, which is a team of a certain size, Product Owner, Scrum Master. We advise against that. Decidedly, don't do that. It's a bad idea. One big reason is, how do you know you've improved? Sure, it feels like we are doing better when we're doing Scrum, maybe. But can you prove it? If you cannot prove it, and it's just a feeling, it could be anything.
You can measure that.
How do you
There are
measure
some
it?
tools.
There are some tools.
Agility helps visualization, like sessions, like this retrospective.
Retrospective usually doesn't come up with anything scientific.
Well, but you still can measure that, and you can do the improvements within the period of time.
You can measure how people feel, which is still a feeling.
Yeah, but if it is the cumulative feeling of the group of people, it still works.
For us, we put a little bit more emphasis on actual data. So we try and stay away from feelings, because feelings are very subjective. And God forbid, if someone in your family had an accident, died, you feel bad, even though your Agile implementation is going well. Natural, right? We try and stay away from that. We try and stick to something slightly more statistical or data-based or data-informed. And for that, you need a baseline of what you're doing right now. Another very, very big factor. Who has tried to implement an Agile process in their own company and has encountered resistance to change. Another very important factor why our first principle is don't change anything. There's no resistance to change if you don't change anything. Right? That's simple. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The second one is create a shared and visual understanding. The visual part for us is very important. Once you visualize something, it's so much easier to understand it. That's the reason in Scrum, why in Scrum in the beginning you had Scrum boards, you had burn down charts, because it's a visualization. You just walk past the board and you already get a big chunk of information out of a fraction of a second looking at a board. That's why on the internet everyone loves infographics, because they make complex data seem simple or simple to understand. You have a pie chart, one thing is in red, one thing is in gray. You kind of know what it means. Visualization help a lot. In our case, we oftentimes use Kanban boards as the bare minimum, but there are a lot of other kind of visualization. For example, you can have a blocker, a visualization of all your blockers, and you can tie your continuous improvement process to visualizations as well. The last part, which again seems to be not that easy to understand for a lot of Agilists, is improve evolutionary. The part that most people don't understand is the word evolution. What does evolution mean? Okay, we are all human beings in this room. What will human beings look like in, let's say, 10,000 years' time? No one knows. Evolution implies that you don't know what your structure will look like in a year's time. There's quite a big contrast to frameworks like Scrum, where when you come and implement Scrum, you know Scrum is your goal. Sometimes people come in and do what we call a gap analysis. Well, now, what do we want to be? How do we get there? In Kanban, we say we don't know what we want to get to. That's the implication of the word evolution. And gap analysis, in most cases, it doesn't work, because there are too many changes happening in the world, and in your own company, and even in your team, probably even in your own life. Okay, processes, principles, and mindset. I'm going to introduce you to one very, very useful tool that we use to improve flow efficiency, which is another way to say to make things much, much, much. Number one, you have to introduce work in progress limits. That alone, just by introducing work in progress limits, whenever I do it, I make things work, go much faster, probably for about, minimum that I had was 100% faster. It goes twice. Sorry? Lead time. I'll talk about metrics later. Once you have that in place, what does a Kanban board tell you? We then apply something called theory of constraints. So the way we look at work, if it flows, if it flows through a system, it's a little bit like an uneven pipe where you push water through. That's our analogy. You push water through. This could be analysis, this part is development, this part is UAT or SIT. You have a different capability within your organization to complete different steps. When water flows through on your Kanban board, you will immediately see bottlenecks. In this case, it will be this bit. What we then do, once you've identified, and it's easy to identify because your tickets will just pile up in that column. If you can, reduce the intake a tiny little bit to get the system to a state where they're no longer just firefighting. That's why you reduce it. You fix the bottleneck.
You're looking at it from a flow efficiency standpoint.
Yes.
But what about sometimes given rigidity tolerance requirements? That level of bottleneck is required for extra validation verification. Of course, you can look towards automation and some sort of.
I don't know what you mean with rigidity requirements. Sorry, can you be more specific?
Well, I would say you start, you go through, I would say, almost, let's use the concept of bridges. Everybody stops and you wait for the government safety inspectors to come and look at it. So that's where you're wrong. Right. So
I wouldn't say that's a bottleneck, especially not when it comes to your workflow.
part of your workflow, but it's almost, you're at the mercy of how intense they wish to inspect and survey and assess and test, right? Confirm your work.
Yeah.
So is that, yes, it disrupts your workflow to a certain extent because certain things have to ground your performance.
I don't know too much about workflow when it comes to bridge.
I just threw it out there.
So this is assuming that it's repeatable parts of your workflow. Things that happen either with every piece of work that you do, or it happens with a lot of work that you do. In the IT example, it's development. Most of the IT stuff goes through a workflow stage where it's in development. If it's a one-off thing like get approval for launch, that would be somewhere else. So that we would not classify it as a workflow bottleneck. Does that answer your question? Okay. So coming back to this one, in this case, to fix the bottleneck. Kanban doesn't tell you how to fix the bottleneck. It could be moving someone to a different team. It could be hiring more people. It could be merging two teams together. It could be many different solutions, but that depends on your organization. Fix the bottleneck, increase the intake again, find out where your next bottleneck is, and do the same thing. That's a very, very easy technique that allows you to go much faster within a short period of time. So usually, for one bottleneck fix, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks. But again, it depends on your context and your organization. In some organizations, it might take 3 months. So that's applying theory of constraints to your workflows. The other part is, in general, look at flow. I use the word flow a lot. Nope, not working. So this video will show you, it's a theoretical example, but it will show you yes, this one. It will show you the difference between what we call flow and batch processing. Batch processing is traditional project management. When do you deploy the project to the next stage? Next stage could be from analysis to design, or from design to implementation. When you deploy stuff. And in PMP, you deploy it when everything's ready. In Scrum, you have a 2-week cycle. It's still batching. You don't have to batch in Scrum. I don't have to add that. Batch flow 1 at the bottom. Then it increases. So you will see the difference. All of them process 10 points. It takes the longest on the top one when your batch is the highest. It is very theoretical and it applies more to manufacturing or factory production than it applies to the kind of work that we do, but the principle is still the same. And that's the reason why we put a much bigger emphasis on flow. Any questions on the flow stuff? I'm jumping to a couple of different topics to give you a good overview. No? Okay, metrics. Yes, metrics. What is that now? So, in Kanban, we have different ways of measuring something. One, at the center of most of our metrics is what we call lead time. Some people call it cycle time, some people have slightly different wordings. Nowadays, especially when it comes to lean, for knowledge work, a lot of us kind of agree to just use the word lead time. But whatever the word is, it means the same. Here it starts, the clock starts ticking when it goes into something that we call a development ready, or it could be anything ready queue. What does that mean? This means the team now commits, and we still use the word commit to deliver this feature to the business. On the other hand, the business commits as well. It's not a one-sided commitment. The business commits to what we call the Spice Girl question, where we ask the business, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. So in a lot of businesses, you have the problem that business says, oh yeah, I want you to do this. But once you start doing it, or even when you finish, actually says, actually, no, I didn't really want that. Why did you work on that? Did I ever tell you that? That's why we have a limit here, to actually make it more of a, well, turn it into a commitment from the business side. So this is a two-sided commitment, from the developers to the business, and from the business to the developers, that this is really what we want right now. And this is also how, one of the big levers in Kanban, and how we make sure that it's fully agile. If you limit your commitment to, in this case, 5 items, you can reduce it to 3 items or maybe 1 item. It depends on your organization. You can change your mind about everything else that's outside there at any time. So the clock starts ticking when there's commitment from both sides. Then there's something that we call system lead time. That is the lead time of your team or of your program that is directly under your control. That's probably the first thing that we look at, because it's, generally speaking, it's much easier to change because it's directly under your control. Usually it ends when you hit the first unlimited queue. Unlimited queues tend not to be in your control. So if you work for a bank and you finish development on a couple of features, you have to hand stuff over for the ops team to deploy. That might be an unlimited queue. But if the ops team is under your direct control, and maybe even part of your team, you could put a limit on it very easily. So system lead time is how long does it take for one ticket to go from one end to the other, which basically means how fast can you develop. There are a couple of factors in there. As long as your ticket size is not random, and by random I mean mathematically random, this works. Then there's another one. We just call that customer lead time or overall lead time. Which would be usually from the first commitment point until it's released. So how long does it take me as a company to get stuff to the customer? Sometimes it's not even commitment. Sometimes we measure it from idea inception. So the first time someone thinks about this idea, that's when the clock starts ticking, because it measures the organizational capability to deliver something to your customer. Any questions on this? So now, every time you finish a ticket, what you get is a data point. Out of the data points, so here you'll see this is lead time, this is frequency. How many tickets finish with a lead time of 5? In this case, 1. This is an actual example. So out of each data point, you can create something that we call a histogram. And out of the histogram, you can then create something that we call a probability function. Okay. Anyone who had statistics in school? Basic statistics? Heard about probability? Maybe even understands probability, which is really, really complex to understand. So once you have that function, what you can do is you can create service level agreements. Why do we call it SLAs? Because we look at it from a service delivery point of view. So if you're a development team, if you're an IT program, you're delivering a service to a certain part of the organization. If you're still split into analysis, development, and testing, as an analyst, you're providing a service to the company, and downstream of you is the development team. The same for the development team. Once we have this, out of the data points that we have, and we need 11 data points statistically to start. You only need 11 data points. Out of that, you can then construct SLAs per percentile. So there's a 75% probability that a ticket will take 18 days to deliver. There's an 85% probability it will take 19 days to deliver. What does this allow you? It allows you to do stakeholder management and give people more accurate estimations. If you're talking to your CEO and you definitely do not want to be wrong when you give him an estimate, you go to a higher percentile. But if you know you're talking to a stakeholder, well, it doesn't really matter if you get it wrong. Maybe you, okay, going to 50% is always a bad idea. But maybe you go with 75%, or you go with 70%. Or you have a deadline, Christmas. After Christmas, delivery of this Christmas feature really doesn't make any sense. So you want to be dead on sure that you deliver this feature for Christmas. You go to a higher percentile. Then you just work backwards and find out when you have to start work on that. And you're statistically 95% guaranteed that you will make it on time. Never ever go to 100%. If you know anything about probability, never ever go to 100%. Also, you'll probably not like the number if you do, theoretically. So in this case, the 100% might be 100 days or something. That's a little bit harder to communicate. But this allows you to analyze your system and actually give predictability based on statistics and not based on any kind of feeling. So we use SLAs. Allows you to manage different stakeholders in a much better way. So in this example, some teams provide different services. In that case, we would split those services and provide different SLAs for each service. Different service could mean development and bug fixing, operational. Those would be different services. So here you see median 9 days. Oftentimes, when we run with other agile methodologies, what we do is we average stuff out, like velocity. Velocity, we take the last 3 and the last 4 the velocities that you had in the sprints and average them out. Probably going to be correct. Don't use averages. They're always a bad idea. There's a very nice book, I think it's called The Law of Averages or something like that. I read it a long time ago. Very nice book that tells you never average stuff out. You're 50% going to be wrong if you average stuff out, which is quite a high probability if you think about that. Different service. Your probability function will probably follow something that we call a Weibull function. Just out of interest. I'm not sure if Chik is watching. two real-life examples from my projects. Any questions on this? You can use Excel to do most of this. There are some free spreadsheets from a guy called Troy McGinnis. Just Google probability.
Actually, you can download a lot of those templates from Microsoft.
I don't think Microsoft does it.
For probability?
For probability when it comes to Agile projects. If you know the formulas, you can just put them in Excel. Most people have problems with that, so just Google something called probabilistic forecasting and Agile, and you'll get a couple of free Excel templates. So once you get to this stage, one of the things that you can very, very easily manage is what we call long tail. It's this stuff that the outliers that you will get that are actually really, really risky. And by just changing one or preventing one bad thing from happening that would give you a data point way out there, you can immediately short your projects by 300–400%. Sometimes it can mean you de-scope something out. Sometimes it means you get rid of a person, or sometimes it means you hire more people. Again, a much better data-based way to improve stuff. So, if you're running a project, you have a Kanban board. When we encounter defects, usually what we do is we create new tickets. And we take the old one and leave it there. So in this case, we will take another ticket, put it on the old ticket as a blocker. Well, actually not a blocker. We call it defect because it's a defect. If it's a blocker, we tend to use red because it stands out. What does this mean? This means the lead time for this ticket, when it just stays there. It stays there until you fix the bug. The lead time for this ticket increases. This is how it gets reflected in your probability function. Same for this. If you have a lot of them, some of the things that you can do is you can group them. So one of the things that I sometimes do is I do retrospectives on demand. Every time I get 4 of those tickets, I do a retrospective. No, we never move stuff back.
Okay, how do you then leave it work in progress during the development? So say you have a defect and your developer has to fix it, right? And it is development as well, right? And you already have the maximum amount to get in your development.
Yeah. Okay.
So does it mean that it will kill the process and extend your work in progress?
So the question was, just for everyone to hear that, if you have a defect here, you create a new in here, and this is already at the limit. So let's say you already have 3 tickets. Now this would add a 4th ticket to it. Do you do it? Depends on the organization. Sometimes we say fixing this does not count against the limit, because unless it happens a lot, then it probably should count against the limit. Different ways to do it. There's no one rule. In Kanban, in general, there's no one rule fits all or one process fits all. We don't do that because every company is different. Did you have a question?
Yeah. You say that you don't put an existing ticket backward. But if you're saying that the ticket already got some issues in it, and there is the team has to go back to the development time, so you are saying that the Kanban system will allow the people or users to create a new ticket to chase that issue rather than using an existing ticket to chase that issue. Is that correct?
In general, we would do that. To give you an analogy, okay, let's say we have feature A, which is now going into testing. You find a bug. Is feature A still in testing? No? You don't think it's in testing? We think, okay, to give you a more extreme example, you've released something to your customers. Now you find a bug. Is it still released to your customer? Yes. Even if you do a recall, it's still released to your customer. So for us, it is in testing. We found a bug. You have to fix the bug. Until we fix the bug, you cannot leave testing. That's the whole thing. Unless you decide, as a business decision, we can live with the bug.
But your testing is not during the time. That means that your testing of this particular feature is not in progress. Right?
Testing has been started, but has not been finished.
Yes, so it is blocked right now, and it doesn't consume any effort right now because it's under testing.
So oftentimes, whether it's a Kanban board or it's a Scrum board, when you move something into in progress, it doesn't mean you're working on it all the time. So one way to look at it is, if any person can have more than one ticket, or if any person can own more than one ticket, by definition it means you're not working on both of them at the same time.
So better just to have only one ticket assigned to you, right?
We're not saying that. It depends on your system. If you're in ops, you might want to work on more than one ticket, because your ticket duration is shorter.
So then it
Different
will
circumstances.
delay the time when you will deliver processes tickets, right? So we have context switching, and you have more work in progress, right?
Different contexts allow for different solutions. What you need to do is understand the context. We're not saying if you work on more than one ticket, everything will be slow. Actually, we're saying don't just work on one thing. Most of the time, it makes things slow if you just work on only one thing. And only one thing. We call it one-piece flow.
Why does that mean slower?
Can we talk about that later?
Yeah.
Okay. So you create a new ticket. This means the lead time for this will increase, which again reflects in your statistics. That's how we deal with this stuff. And once you know my lead time is really long, the question turns into how do I reduce my lead time?
So another thing.
Yes.
I don't know how you put the task into like really into smaller parts, or like a big version could be one ticket on a Kanban system. So I was realizing that we have some like really big features that we put it into one ticket, but then we found that in this feature there are some minor, you can say like minor, there are some more bug fixing that we need to do before we can complete this function, so that people started creating those like many tickets to fix those minor issues one by one, and then it then like is
I'm not sure I understand your question.
so there is one big feature.
Yes.
We had to complete it. But while we are doing the development on this feature, we found that there are some more problems. So that we found some 5 bugs before we can
Again, what's your question?
If we increase in the ticket, then in the statistical way, we will see that there are more tickets that we need to complete before.
If there's a defect here, you put a defect on there, you create a new ticket. That new ticket does not go into your statistic. It's only for visual management. Because everything is inside this ticket. Everything is covered in here. So it just means that your big feature will take much longer to complete. That's it. And when you go back to the statistics, you will see that in your probability graph.
So that doesn't count it, the new created one.
No, the new created tickets, they don't count.
So basically, to make a better statistics, you have to make very small size tasks, right?
You don't have to, no. You can apply the same thing on portfolio level, where every ticket is a project that you track. And you can get the same statistical probability back than if you do it on the ground with actual feature tickets. This works on every level. And if you have large tickets, it works. And if you have small ticket, it works. You can mix them together. Maybe not a good idea, but it still works. Because it's statistics. When we follow this, and you're a project manager or you work a lot with projects, it changes the discussion to how can we prevent long-living tickets, because they are the ones that skew my projects drastically. And it goes into a discussion of risk management, because all of those are risks. For example, having some huge tickets that are really vague that no one knows about, that's a risk. So maybe the reaction could be, let's split it down. Maybe. To identify risks, the likelihood to impact, the likelihood to create a delay. I'm running out of time. Very much. This is another very good technique. So once a month, or maybe once every 2 weeks, depending on how many blockers we get, I just take all the blockers and I group them. And then we do a retrospective just for that. Or we do root cause analysis on the one that impacts us the most. Again, the goal is to get rid of all those long tails that you have in the statistic. If you get rid of one, suddenly your lead time improves drastically by 40%, depending on why you have this long tail. I'm going to skip this one. Okay, one more thing about scaling. When you look at, has anyone here ever done SOA, service-oriented architecture? How easy is it to scale service-oriented architecture? Not easy. Why? Depends. Okay, depends. Microservices, right? Has anyone heard about microservices? SOA. How do we scale in Kanban? We start with one team, do a Kanban board for that team. We start another team in Kanban, we have a Kanban board for them. We merge them together. The Kanban boards, not necessarily the teams. Once you merge those boards together, you can then do the lead time for all of them and improve on a more systematic level. And once you have visibility of a whole company, of a whole workflow, the workflow that the company actually goes through, you can drastically reduce that. The largest Kanban implementation in the world is currently done by Huawei in China. They have about probably 4,000 people doing Kanban. From what I know, I only know that from the code over there, and it would have reason to say good things about that. What I know, in the first 3 months, they reduced the development lead time by 60%. I don't know how accurate that is. Take it with a grain of salt.
You asked me what kind of challenges do you manage?
Yes. Yes. Let's talk about it later, because I'm really running out of time. This is an example of Kanban on portfolio level. Here, these are the projects. These are the projects in the pipeline that are currently being prepared. These are actual tasks that are being, more higher level tasks that are being done on each project. Kanban can be used to visualize anything on low level and on high levels. And Kanban works really well if you have what we call shared resources. For example, you have 4 teams, but only one designer. How do you work with the designer? Scrum doesn't give you a good solution. Here we limit the work that the designer can do. Okay, another way, oftentimes we get asked how long does something take? Turn this around and ask people, when do you need it, and what is the cost of delay? So if we don't do it by then, what's the cost? Most of the time the answer is nothing. There is no cost. In that case, it's not urgent, and you can delay it. We'll talk about this. Okay, any questions? Yes.
This morning, before the session, I attend the design thinking workshop. How can it be integrated to the Kanban system?
In design thinking, you go through
Right.
certain steps,
So
right?
how do these two, how do they combine?
As long as you have some kind of workflow, all you have to do is visualize the workflow, probably using columns. If you go through a certain workflow in design thinking, which most people do, you just visualize it in columns. Or another way you can do it is, instead of the workflows inside your design thinking, you keep track on a high level on the design thinking experiments that you run. Which ones are being prepared, which ones are being prototyped, which ones have passed the prototype stage successfully, which ones have failed. Yes?
Do you measure the effort of any individual, or you just focus on flow?
We focus on flow.
No individual.
We don't focus on individuals.
Then how can you spot out the bottleneck?
How can I
How can
spot
you spot the cause of the bottleneck? How do you know what causes the bottleneck?
So once you find a bottleneck, you have to look into the root cause. That's when you might look into the individuals that are involved in that bottleneck. But in general, we don't manage people as such, we manage the work. This is our way to make sure that people don't micromanage. Any more questions? Yes?
Do you have a suggestion for a digital version of Kanban board?
Do I have a suggestion for what?
A digital version of a Kanban board for those that platform.
Do you have a lot of money? If you do have a lot of money, I suggest a tool called Kit, and that's not because I'm wearing the t-shirt, it's because it's actually a good tool. And Kit gives you all the statistical analysis that I've talked about. It gives you the probability graph, and you can just type in 78% probability, and it will tell you how long it will take. Okay, thank you guys very much. If you have any more questions, just come and talk to me. If not, enjoy lunch. Lunch is ready.